What a fantastic turnout. Welcome, as I said, everybody, to the Christmas edition of H Advisors Book Club. And we are blessed. We are so excited to have here with us today none other than Lionel Barber, possibly the most storied financial journalist and editor of our generation, 15 years as editor of the Financial Times, who has written his second book, which I can tell you, and I hope you all go away with a copy, is an absolute rip-snorting read, Gambling Man, for more than 4 years in the making, huge amount of research, and it reads like a thriller. The tale of Masayoshi Son, each chapter, you don't know whether he'll end up dead, bust, or even richer. And without giving away too much of a spoiler alert, by the end of most chapters, he is indeed even richer. But it's a hell of a ride. But before I go any further, I want to thank all of you. We've done a number of book clubs this year. We're going to have a great list coming up next year. But there is, of course, the first rule of book club, which the team here gave me for my secret Santa. So there we are. Show the camera. So the first rule of book club. The first rule of book club is what happens in book club stays in book club. Not necessarily. Actually, not at all, because we are recording this to go out around the H Advisors Network worldwide. And it is slightly nerve-wracking, certainly for me, to be interviewing a superb journalist, but also in front of one of Britain's best-known business TV journalists and presenters, Ian King, at the back. I had asked him for some tips, but he refused. Anyway, let's start on Gambling Man. Lionel, let's start with an open one. Tell us about Masayoshi Son, who he is and what makes him tick.
He was the richest man in the world for 3 days in February 2000. Then he lost 97% of his wealth. He's, by the way, and this is crucial, we'll talk about this, he's Korean Japanese, so he's an outsider, mistrusted by the elite. He is probably one of the most consequential investors, largely in tech, in this extraordinary period of the last 30, 40 years, this tech revolution that we've seen from internet to mobile to now artificial intelligence. By the way, that's his latest big fifth comeback. He's a man who has bet big on Yahoo early, Alibaba. He's created his own mobile phone company in Japan. He's been extraordinarily successful, and he's got a network, Neil, which is almost as good as yours.
Almost as good as yours. Let me ask...
I was just waiting for that, by the way.
Let me ask a fundamental question. Having read the book, I was left with lots of big unanswered questions, but one in particular. His father, as you say, always thought that Masa was a genius. But is he a genius, or is he an extraordinarily lucky, big risk taker in a bull market?
I'll come to his father in a second, because it's crucial to understand his father's background. He was a bootlegger, aged 14, in the shanty town where Masa grew up. He was then a pig breeder. He could make quite a lot of money in that in the late 50s. And then he was a loan shark, and then he went into pachinko. It's a great novel about that, the slot gambling. So that's influencing Masa's psyche. It's the way he looks at things. So the answer to your question, and if you like, I can tell you about interviewing his father, aged 87, in the family home. But the answer to your question is that he's a genius with a lowercase g. He's not just lucky. He understood, we were talking about this earlier, he just latched himself onto the big mega trend and stuck with it. He understood. He claims to have had an epiphany reading PC Weekly and seeing the microchip for the first time. It's extraordinarily similar to the same story that Bill Gates So, but there we are. Tells you something. But I think he's a genius in the sense that he also sees around the corner, you know, the cliches, end of the movie. He kind of sees something and says, I see the potential in the business. I'm not going to care about short-term losses. I'm sticking with it.
And when he bets large.
He's bet the company several times. I mean, when he met Jack Ma in Beijing in December '99, interesting, think about the market then. It was almost peaking. And he went in there, he was speed dating. That was for tech, by the way, just in case anybody's worrying. And he had 5 other investors with him, and he was the only one who bet on Jack Ma. They all said, no, he's even smaller than you, Masa. Not, you know, and he said, no, it's like smelling the horse flesh. This guy's got it. And he put 20 million in and then 80 million. 100 million bet turns into 140 billion. Not bad.
To really understand him, and you spend some time in the book on his early life, it is the fact that he is Korean, not by birth, but by heritage. And I think one of the things that makes the book so gripping is through your time at the FT owned by Nikkei and through family connections, you really understand Japan and you understand the cultural and social divides in Japan, which most of the rest of us won't. Take us through what it means for him, what it meant for him to be a Korean growing up in Japan.
Well, first of all, can I just correct you on something, Neil? I mean, you're being far too kind to me. I don't think I understand Japan at all, really, not much. I mean, I was completely naive in my thinking that I could just waltz into SoftBank and say, hello, you know, Lionel Barber, you know, storied editor of the Financial Times, you know, here I am. And they just kind of went, oh. I mean, the first time I went to Japan, they just said he was too busy. So I thought, I'm going to make you pay.
And you've flown all the way there?
I'd flown all the way there, yeah. No, they said they hadn't quite promised, but, you know. So I just said, okay, I'm going to Kyushu. I'm going to find the family home. I'm going to his schools. I'm taking my researcher. We haven't mentioned the researcher. I was going nowhere fast. I mean, again, I was having a lot of difficulty trying to get my head around Japanese history. And I went to Stanford because I thought, okay, I've been kind of blocked in Japan. So I'm going to America. I'm going to tap my Silicon Valley network. And I went to Stanford University and had lunch with the brilliant and a good friend, Neil Ferguson. And Neil said, well, how's the book coming? And I said, I don't know whether I can do this. And he said, well, what's the problem? And he said, you need a researcher. You need a PhD. I said, well, I don't know any PhDs in. So he said, I'll find one. And he did. And then the person wasn't quite right. And he said, then found the right one. He said he didn't have a PhD, but he was brilliant. There was only one problem, and Freddie, you'll forgive me, but Korean Japanese, brilliant. Educated at Eton, not so good. Talks too much for a researcher, but otherwise, I couldn't resist that. But the serious point is, yes, Nikkei, I did 14 trips in 4 years to go to Tokyo to cement the relationship between the Financial Times and particularly myself and the proprietor, because I thought it was so important that the relationships mattered. So yes, we had talks, we had late nights, and my sister-in-law is Japanese. My brother, certainly my twin, knows Japan very, very well. But I think you're being a bit kind.
But talk to us about, let's get back to Masa.
Oh,
let's get back to Masa. As a Korean by blood, but not by birth, growing up in Japan.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's crucial. I mean, first of all, you know, he didn't spend that long in the shanty town, and his home was actually on the edge. But his grandmother, who's a very influential figure, certainly, you know, it's a tin shack. It's now a parking lot next to Tosu Station in Kyushu. And the crucial thing is that, you know, he lived under an alias until he was sort of 21, because the Korean Japanese they have to. If they want to blend into Japanese society, they take an alias. But then they're blocked from public service jobs, teaching. That's what Masa wanted to do. So when he told his father he wanted to be a teacher, his father said, no way, you can't do that. So what does he do? He does 2 things. The first is that he escapes. So how many names am I allowed to drop in this interview?
As many as you
Okay.
like.
Okay. Clang. I rang up Walter Isaacson before I started this book, and I said, "You've written the best, as far as I'm concerned, business biography around ever." He said, "Yes, I have." No. That's the Steve Jobs book. And I said, "What is the key to writing a great bio?" And he said, "Well, it's access, but tell me about Masa." And the key thing is that Masa escaped. Masa went to America on the recommendation of the gentleman who was given the McDonald's franchise. And he went to California, and he spent 6 years there, and he learned English properly. He saw the PC revolution, and then went back to Japan. So that's the key. And the second is motivation. He turned adversity into a strength, into a weapon. Because he basically said, "I'm going to stuff these Japanese. I'm going to be number one." And he just had to find what was he going to do? What was the business? And the business was software distribution.
And that was
1981.
the second business, because of course the first were the translators that he produced.
Yeah, the speech synthesizer. And again, I'll try and tell this story briefly, but again, imagine it's October 21. I'm the recovering editor of the Financial Times, and I'm doing my journey. I think I'm going to find people in California. And I've heard about this professor called Forrest Moser of Nebraska, a nuclear physicist. And he was Masa's first business partner. Masa studied economics at Berkeley, but they developed this speech synthesizer. So I'd written to him by email. I was getting nowhere. I go around the campus. Everything's locked down. I go back to my hotel, and I just looked at myself in the mirror. And this is a true story, Neil. And I literally said, "You're useless. I mean, you have got nowhere. You've spent all day. You think just because you were at Berkeley as a visiting scholar back in '92 that you could parlay that. You've asked for his academic records. That's private. You've got nowhere. You're useless." And I thought, what did we do when we were trying to find Kweku Adebole, the rogue trader at the FT? Answer, LinkedIn. So I looked at LinkedIn for Moser, and I found Todd Moser. Looked in his 60s. He's a software developer. And I sent him a message. And I thought, this must be Moser's son, Forrest Moser's son. It was. He said, "Gee, I thought Pops had got in touch with you." No, he didn't. I said, "Can I have his phone number?" He gave me his home phone number. I ring up and I say, "Hello, this is Lionel Barber. Hello." And I said, "Well, look, I'm leaving tomorrow. Can I possibly come and see you?" So he said, "Sure." And then there's this sign. He says, "Give me 2 words to describe Masayoshi Son." And I said, "Can I have 4? Because I think if I blow this, there's no interview." So I said, "Reckless gambler, would-be genius." He says, "How about just crook?" And he told me the story, which is in the book, about how he felt double-crossed. Because Masa went behind his back, sold the product to Sharp, but he didn't get any money.
I can't remember. I mean, this is the point I was coming on to, which is time and again as you go through the book, Masa comes across as, I mean, if we say it politely, a corner cutter.
A chancer.
And
cutter.
at times verging into the downright dishonest. I mean, is that...
Yeah, so he's not a crook. Let's be really clear about that. And I would say every entrepreneur at some point, you're taking risks, you might cut a corner. Is he breaking the law? No. Is he breaking his word? Maybe sins of omission rather than commission. So I'd put it more in that category. It's a bit of bullshit, technical term. I think it's more that. And by the way, the other thing is, people in this room know Koreans versus Japanese. Koreans are like that. They're very extrovert. Where, he's not really Japanese.
One thing the book also has is almost a sense of Forrest Gump, or that other Woody Allen, the film Zelig, the Woody Allen film, where he seems to pop up at the right-hand side of almost every famous person in the technology world for the last 40 and more years. And we can name one or two of the. We've talked about Jack Ma already. We can come across others, but one of my old bosses, Rupert Murdoch, comes into it. First of all, how did he do it? How did he get alongside these people? And is that also key to his success?
Oh, I think it's crucial that first of all, he had mentors who became collaborators. So one of them is a brilliant Japanese computer scientist who had deep contacts in Silicon Valley, a man called Tadashi Sasaki. But what he does, he finds places where and he's very extrovert, he's very kind of engaging, charming, speaks English, not 100% perfect, but pretty good. He's got a sense of humor, and he's endearing. Right? He can be unbelievably transactional. Jerry Yang said, after several rounds of negotiations, I'm like your ATM machine. But what he does is he's a brilliant networker. And he found out that the best place to network was a trade fair called Comdex in Las Vegas. And guess what he does? That's where he meets Bobby Kotick. That's where he met Bill Gates before in Japan. But that's where he meets Steve Jobs. And this is like 1986. And 10 years later, or 9 years later, what does he do? He buys Comdex. Then so he's got a whole network. He's suddenly on stage, right? And then he was the bridge, very, very important. He worked out he could be the bridge between US and Asia. And he could, sometimes a bit arrogantly, say, you need me, I'm the gateway to Japan. So he says to John Chambers, who's gone nowhere at Cisco, I'll stop doing the accent, but I'll form a joint venture with all these Japanese companies. I'll scare the shit out of them because, you're nowhere in routing compared to Cisco. And he tells Chambers, we'll do a joint venture with that. Guess what? He then gets put on the Cisco board. So he's got a sentry position in Silicon Valley. That's how he operates. He's brilliant at it.
He is, and then he makes those connections. He's probably the world's most talented kind of connector, not more than a networker. But it doesn't always work. It doesn't always work. And so let's turn to work, or rather WeWork, where he signed away, well, the legend has it, he signed away over $4 billion in the back of a car.
Is this true? That's not a legend, that's a true story.
Tell us a bit more about it.
Well, Masa's on his way to see Trump, by the way. That's a special episode in the book where I could do the imitations, but it's a hilarious meeting set up by Steve Schwartzman and then, he's now deceased, Sheldon Adelson, who, by the way, owned Comdex. And Masa paid a giant sum of money. I found Adelson's number 2, a wonderfully named Jason Chudnovsky from Boston, who told me all about the negotiations around Comdex. Anyway, he's on his way to see Trump with that meeting, where he basically wants to try and get Trump to sign off on a Sprint T-Mobile merger. Or, he's making nice to Trump. But he meets Adam Newman. He's due to spend 2 hours there, but as usual, it's 15 minutes. So he then invites Newman, this Jesus Christ-like figure, 6'5", claims he's a Navy officer in intelligence, all this stuff, and pulls out his iPad and signs a $4.4 billion check.
So this shows that even Masa, who has charmed his way into getting other people,
helps when you got a checkbook,
has been charmed himself, or has been turned.
Yeah, I call it. Yeah, I call it founder syndrome. They both kind of reinforce each other. One Indian who I just loved talking with him, who shall remain nameless, said, it was like feeding a monkey alcohol. Masa just giving money to Adam Newman. But he wanted to believe. And when people said, serious people, the Goldman guy, Mark Schwartz, or even Rajiv Misra, we can come to, the SoftBank vision head, there's a whole Deutsche Bank, I almost said mafia, network. they said, you should not be giving any more money to Adam. And he said, Masa's response is very interesting. Every time you tell me I shouldn't be doing this, I look around and say, that's what everybody told me with Alibaba. So I'm right. And that kind of belief, the extraordinary self-belief and confidence in your own vision is what distinguishes Masa. So sometimes it can go wrong.
And he lost a lot.
He lost, I think, you could say 14 billion. I mean, he made the Saudis good. They were embarrassed by this, by the way. That was a real problem with the Vision Fund. Vision Fund 2, he couldn't get any outside money post that. They were, it's bad for the reputation.
But let's not dwell on the bad moments at the wheel and the croupier's scooper. Let's look at some of the good ones. When he bought out Arm from the London market, we all thought that was a pretty full price deal. But it wasn't, was it?
No, and I devote a chapter on Arm. I mean, this is one of top British technology companies. And it was sold in 15 days. Masa made 4 offers, all cash, unconditional. And the board was just swept away. And of course, as I describe it, it so happened that this coincided with Brexit. Now, Masa did not know that the vote was going to be leave, but he did tell me that he deliberately timed the bid in July because that was when all the bankers would be on holiday. And he had his forces mobilized and he just steamrolled them. And Jeremy Hayward, deceased now, the cabinet secretary, I describe him negotiating the terms of the deal with Masa while David Cameron is in the House of Commons giving his farewell speech. I mean, there was no government. And then Theresa May, when she was involved, she just said, we can't possibly have any delay in this business because Brexit's just happened. We need to show that Britain is open for business. So it was a rich price. I mean, Masa, they didn't do any due diligence, by the way, on Masa. They knew nothing about how he takes companies private, then flips them. Masa was certainly looked at trying to pull off a merger with NVIDIA. Everybody knows this $3.5 trillion company. And he lost interest soon afterwards because he was off on the Vision Fund. But he did give guarantees on employment, on the headquartered in Cambridge. He stuck to that. And do you know what? Now they've changed the business model. They're not kind of friends with everybody. They're going to go into serious competition with NVIDIA. They did float on the stock exchange in New York, not London. And this thing is now worth 140 billion. He paid 32. Not bad.
And makes up for quite a few WeWorks.
Yeah, and I think that, again, I don't bet on stocks, but I would say, having looked at what they're doing now, I would think Arm is in a pretty interesting place. And I'd also say, single, by the way, just winding the movie back a bit, I mean, he pulled off buying Vodafone Japan for about 20 billion in 2006 to create his own mobile phone operator against the entrenched NTT, which 6 years before was the most valuable company in the world, and against KDD. He bought Japan Telecom from Ripplewood, put those two together, and then guess what? This is where the network comes in. He got an exclusive deal to distribute the iPhone from Steve Jobs. I mean, Masa claims that I design the emoticons. Yeah, okay, Masa. You got an exclusive deal. It's pretty. I think he may have had some influence at the margin, but that was a great deal, and he operated that business. And when people say it's all financial engineering, Masa isn't, is it real? Is he leveraged to the gills? He's got some serious performing businesses, and SoftBank Mobile is definitely that.
I know I'm going to open it up to questions around the room because I know a lot of people have some really much more interesting questions than I do. And also, may I say now, Lionel has said he's more than happy to answer much broader questions about the world next year, about politics and economics and where we sit, because we sit at quite an interesting place. So let me just ask one, and then I may come back at the end of everybody else's questions. Your last chapter throws it forward to Masa's desire, determination to get into AI. But will Masa have a legacy, or is his legacy really supporting the real wealth creators, whether they are the Steve Jobs or the team at ARM or the Jack Ma's? Is he a facilitator, or will he have his own legacy?
Well, he's not an inventor. He doesn't own his own proprietary kind of systems or anything like that. And he feels acutely, he's, by the way, a gifted artist. He showed me some of his paintings. It's sort of early Impressionism, I think. But he feels that acutely, that, you know, I want to be in the same league and seen as one of the great businessmen of the late 20th, early 21st century. So he's very focused on his legacy. He thinks he's told friends he's going to live to 120 or 130, thanks to AI, okay? But I think he really, really is trying to figure out how he has this fifth big comeback is going to really cement his legacy as one of the greats. But he will be a kind of facilitator. He's the middleman. You can make a lot of money in the middle. By the way, just to be clear, he's made, as I've discovered in promoting this book, and the audiences that have come to listen to me, he's made a lot of people rich. And you can be cynical and say, yes, but he's made a lot of people rich with other people's money. Well, we all get loans from banks and things like that. But, you know, he raised the Vision Fund. We haven't talked about that, but it was 100 billion or 98.6 billion. 45 billion from the Saudis, 15 billion from UAE. And he spread that around. I mean, I call it the Jackson Pollock theory of investing, sort of, you know. But he has made a lot of people rich over the years. And he's very creative. So I would say I kind of admire him for that.
Thank you. And now comes the interesting part of the lunchtime. Questions from people, please. Neil first. You definitely had your hand in the air.
40 years. Would you compare him to James Hansen, or who would you compare him to?
I'm not sure Hansen is in a slightly different era, so he's not really into the big technology play in the way that Masa has done. I'm also not sure how many times Hansen bet the company, but he was a voracious acquirer of businesses and streamlining businesses and kind of making a conglomerate work. Of course, Hansen didn't, you know, after he departed the scene, it didn't really survive. And I think Masa's businesses will survive, although they may be, when he leaves, what is SoftBank, because he is SoftBank. So I don't think they're quite the same, actually. There's some characteristics, but they're different.
Thank you.
From shantytown to billionaire investor,
Yeah.
how did he get really from shantytown to that billionaire investor? You spoke about how he...
First, he claims to have made his first million in Berkeley as a result of the speech synthesizer and video games, which he inserted in restaurants, and he bought a property near Telegraph Avenue. So I think he certainly made a few $100,000 maybe. Then he had to have mentors, or at least a couple of mentors helped him get credit, because he didn't want to go into the pachinko business. But you've got to remember, his father at this point, by the way, subsidized him when he was at Berkeley. So, I mean, he wasn't just subsidizing, giving him a couple of thousand. It's like 10,000, 50,000 a year or something, which in those days is quite a lot of money. And he was the king of pachinko in Kyushu. His father's a very wealthy man. I think the change then is he gets into software distribution, and this is a totally new industry. He's put himself between wholesaler and retailer, and he's created a very profitable business. But the next where he kind of gets to towards a billionaire is, one, you have the bubble, it crashes. He's not into big time in real estate. He's somewhat protected, but he uses record low interest rates to borrow, and then does a currency play in the States. buys when the yen is strong, buys assets in America, and then on the back of that goes public in 1994 on the junior stock market. He's a billionaire. So he does it in 13 years.
What was his pitch to raise $100 billion from the Saudis and the UAE? You don't just walk in and
His pitch is, I can introduce you to the tech ecosystem in America. I've got the contacts, I know the companies, and there's a convergence of interest between Masa, who needs money, and MBS, who needs the kind of credibility, the openings, and also, as I describe in the book, and I have interviewed MBS in Riyadh with Rula back in 2015 for nearly 2 hours. It was off the record, but it was still very interesting. You could feel really that he was serious about modernizing Saudi Arabia and trying to reduce the dependency on oil. So he's trying to, okay, there's a slight diversion with Mr. Khashoggi, so to speak. I mean, but this is a young ruler bent on modernization, and he needs the contacts. So that's the play. And you could see the way the valuations were going up at the time. I don't see it as image cleansing. You see, I would put Masa's relationship with the Saudis in a very different bucket to FIFA's relationship with the Saudis or the World Boxing Championship. That's reputation laundering. This is much more serious. This is about trying to create a new city. This is about Saudis becoming more mature investors on the global scene. This is about the Saudis trying to be the Germany of the kind of Persian Gulf, Middle East, a modernizing force. And I'm not carrying water, so to speak, for the Crown Prince. And I'm certainly not making jokes about what happened. I mean, we had lunch with Jamal Khashoggi in Jeddah after seeing the Crown Prince in 2015. And then when you read in the newspaper what happened to him, that's pretty chilling. And, the Prince, I don't want to go anymore, but I mean, the idea that it's nothing to do with me is, it doesn't work. He's accepted responsibility. But I think at the same time, you do need to take very seriously the forces of modernization that he's driving. And also remember that 18 out of the 21 hijackers in September 11 were Saudi. I mean, these are radical Islamists, and he's clamped down on that.
Has he got a number two? Is there a team that's gone with him through these things? I mean, often everyone's focused always on the top.
Yeah, they're the samurai. I mean, again, it's a bit of a cliche, but Goto-san, the chief financial officer, is a very key guy. I mean, Masa, it's worth saying, every time he falls on his face, he kind of retreats and does penance. He's not really. He's plotting his next comeback, but Goto-san then became the front man, and he's quite an impressive guy. He's a workaholic. Then there's a couple of very mysterious figures around him, one of whom does the relationship with Apple. But maybe Goto-san could be actually, I don't want to be presumptuous. I mean, there isn't an obvious successor. And Masa, the other point, which is really important, which you can touch on, is Masa hires kind of hired guns. And when SoftBank goes truly global ahead of the Vision Fund, he hires Nikesh Arora from Google. There's a hilarious napkin routine where they're putting giant zeros on the remuneration package. Ends up at 320 million, guaranteed, 4 years, not bad. Rajiv got a huge deal. And then, of course, there's this Bolivian American, this towering 6'6", Marcelo Claure. And he was earning, he sold his company to Masa for $1 billion and was the chief operating officer. So he's had these enforcers, operators helping him, but they're not natural successors at all. And all three of them, those last three, have left.
There's a couple, but
yeah.
yes.
So you talked about his sort of outsider status at the start, being of Korean heritage, and now
with suspicion. He doesn't make anything. He doesn't make cars. He doesn't make steel. You know, who is he? There's still, and I say this very guardedly, but there's still a lot of deep prejudice and suspicion towards Korean Japanese. I mean, do read Pachinko. It's an amazing book. It's sort of Brothers Karamazov of Korean literature. I won't say in this presence, even with your wonderful T-shirt, but I asked a senior Japanese business person. By the way, I did interview, because he was on the record, Tadashi Yanai, who was on the board for nearly 20 years, the founder of Uniqlo, fast retailing. Amazing interview, where he talked about Masa. It's quite critical, but sort of grudging. And those are the two kind of richest men in Japan. But there was another Japanese, and I said, I couldn't get him to talk. I mean, you don't know how difficult, I think some people know how difficult it is to get the Japanese to talk properly about others. I had a couple of introductions where I finally cracked the code, but this guy, he just kept being unavailable. So I cornered him in a conference, and I said, I'd love to see you. I really would. I've sent you emails. And he kind of looked at me blankly. Then I said, okay, I get it. You're too busy to see me. Again, there's nothing. So I said, but I have one question. What is the one question you would ask Masayoshi Son? And this guy looks at me. He's a big name. And he says, ask him, why does he hate Japan so much? Tells you everything.
I want to jump, because it's such an interesting question, but
we should say that the banks are still backing him. Mizuho, very important for him.
does he, to an extent in Japan, his way of doing business, reinforce some of the prejudices in Japan?
Well,
because he's a wild Korean.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is a question, Neil. It's a great question, and I wrestled with this, and I did get asked all the Japanese that I finally got in to see, and you know, in strange places, often at night. That's why I look so knackered. And you kind of say, the question I was asking is actually, there's a stratum in Japan that see Masa as a necessary evil. You know, we need to be disrupted. I mean, if otherwise the consensus takes so long, it's so difficult. You know, so he's good, but we don't want too much Masa, right? So I think some people kind of give him grudging respect, but they don't like leverage. They won't give him enough credit for being, you know, an incredibly successful global businessman. I mean, how many Japan? Okay, you got Sony bought Columbia Pictures. And that finally, it took 20 years. Howard Stringer was very important in kind of finally integrating those businesses. But how many people have been truly global? I mean, he is. So that makes him both different, object of envy. And he's been very careful also to keep his image below the, you know, retailers, by the way, retail investors, if they've had the stomach to sit with the share price going like that, they've done okay. They've done pretty well. And especially in deflationary Japan, with interest rates at rock bottom, 0. And if you make 11% on your money with SoftBank, okay, it's up and down, but that's not bad.
Sam.
Hi, I'm kind of interested in what you think, or maybe you know what you think of the book.
Well, if you write a book and you're worried about what the person's going to think, you're dead. And so, you know, I just put that out of my mind. I just tried to write it. I did tell him that, and I had 4 sit-down interviews with him, and he was generous and extremely grateful for the time that he gave. I think that they think it's a fair book. I know that he feels that it's a serious book. I think there are 1 or 2 areas where he definitely preferred that I hadn't written about certain things, like his house. and which is known as Wayne Manor. It's 3 conjoining houses in central Tokyo, and it's mad. So you've got an artificial golf course in the basement with, you know, you can play any course in the world. They've got sprinklers with a man holding an umbrella. I mean, it's mad. It's all mad.
And is there a bat cave?
Yeah. I mean, well, actually, when you go down, it's a kind of bat cave, yeah. But I also, you know, I did see him in the summer at Sun Valley, and he came over, well, I came over to him and I said, you know, introduced him to my wife, and he hadn't met her, and he looked at me and he said, oh, I still don't know, why do you write this book? Why do you write about me? And of course he's fishing for giant compliments. And then he says, you know, oh, gambling man. And I know that they're his kind of flunkies, or his people, I better not say flunkies. No, his very important people, they are. But they were not totally happy with the title, but he likes it. Gambling man, he said, oh, I think I am a gambling man. So I think they're, you know, it's going to be translated in Japanese. I think they're a bit nervous about that, but, you know, probably happy. I mean, look, it's the same as when I worked at the FT. You know, I don't really care, as long as it's accurate. And, you know, there were some mistakes they found, but not a lot, because I did my homework. I worked really hard on it.
I know there are lots of questions. Actually, I'll take one more. Oh, Leo, sorry. No. 2 more.
Who would be the third person you liked in that company, and how would the conversation go?
Well, it would be Steve Jobs, because Jobs understands Japan so well. But I would say, and I did interview him for this book, he's a really, really impressive person. Joe Tsai, the co-founder of Alibaba. He's brilliant.
One last one from James.
Really interesting. I was interested to hear that he took our private or bought it for 30 billion, and then it's now worth, I think you said 130 or 140.
Yeah, 130, 140.
Flirtation. Why do you think it took an outsider like him to see the value in art no one else could see?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a brilliant question, and because he could see what it could be 5 to 7 years down the track, and he was prepared to wait, so he's not working on a quarterly basis, right? But also, just because I want to be fair to Hermann Hauser, who's a big opponent of the deal, Masa in 2016, all he could talk about, and I remember him coming into the Financial Times, all he could talk about was the Internet of Things. You know, trillion devices, and ARM, he said, would be in the center of the Internet of Things. I mean, it's kind of half bullshit. But then, guess what? We're in this new age of the super advanced chip. This is why NVIDIA is worth $3.5 trillion. ARM is riding on the bit on the back of the coattails of that. So maybe he didn't get it completely right, but he kind of said, I believe in this. By the way, he was stalking ARM for 10 years, and then he pounced. So I would say he is visionary in that respect. And you kind of, if you really want to make a lot of money, or lose a lot of money, have kind of some vision about what something could become. And he's very good at the application of technology. That's the other thing. He's really clever at that. This application could be this product. Very good.
Lionel, I will say proper thanks in a moment, but I know a lot of you have questions. But Lionel will be here with us for a bit, so you can ask them privately. There are copies of the book at the back for all of you to go away and read, and I really, really would read it. Looking at this has been a fantastic group today, particularly this close to Christmas. The wonderful Jess tells me there may not be enough copies of the book. If we do run out, just leave your name and we'll send one on to you and leave an address. But Lionel is happy to sign them. I have a few people to thank. before we go through. First of all, to all of you, and thank you if this is your first book club or you've been coming for a series. Thank you for all your support. We love doing them. We've had some great authors. We've had some great discussions, and we're going to be publishing the start of our 2025 list next year when I have persuaded more authors to come in. And you are all welcome. And please bring a guest, bring someone. This is a growing community, and it's great. In terms of thank yous, I'd love to thank the technical team, and for the first time, I get a look at the camera and thank them for a great job. I think on this occasion, everyone has heard the conversation, spot on, and we are also recording, and this will be put on all our digital and social channels in due course, probably an edited version, but we'll do that. I would like to thank Freddie Barber for persuading Lionel to come in and providing the key link in that chain. He is the Masayoshi style connection in this room. And I would like to thank the Indefatigable Jess and Ben for putting it all together and ensuring that we're all here today. So thank you. I will ask one last question. There's a hint in your epilogue. There's a hint that there will be a Masayoshi coming out 5.0 quite soon, the Masayoshi AI Genius. Is that next year?
I think you'll see some significant news in the first quarter next year.
You've heard it here first. Let's all watch and wait. Thank you, everyone. And most of all, the most important person, I haven't thanked him, Lionel Barber, who has written a fantastic book, and you all must read it.
Thank you, Neil. Very happy to sign copies of the book. If you like it, write a review on Amazon. Thanks.